Hello, everyone. Welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Himvar, and today I have another Dungeons and Dragons focused video for you. Just more that it's like more broadly D&D. I've done these before. I mean, recently I had a video on Quag Keep, and before that on Dragontales, and also like on late last year, I did a video on recommending books or talking about briefly um, every Dungeons and Dragons setting that has novels for it, because I read a novel from every setting that is published. So, but this one is more on the historical side of things again, and it is pretty much this is along with Dragon Tales and Quag Keep, and then the Gnome Cache, which I still haven't done a video on. But I was reading early D&D fiction essentially, and I found that these four stories that I'm going to talk about today are probably the earliest, as far as I'm aware. They are the earliest fiction that is pretty strictly tied to Dungeons and Dragons. And so in many ways, this is it. This is like the progenitor works, the seminal works, and they're all by Gary Gygax, which is unsurprising. There's probably something else that is like D&D fiction. I wouldn't be surprised if some of those early adopters of OD&D wrote about some of their adventures and put them in some like newsletter somewhere or some APA. And that's because that's essentially what these are. These are just by Gygax himself. And so what these also are going to be a glimpse into is early Greyhawk as well, Proto-Greyhawk, if you would, even more so than the Gnome Cache or Quag Keep, or there are. So I wrote them out. I wrote my notes out in a different order, but I believe actually I'm going to try to start with the earliest one. I think is the earliest, and that is actually. Not really a story so much. So pretty much what all of these are, every single one, is that they are fictionalized retellings of events that happened at a table, and that is pretty strict. Okay, so the very first one comes from an article called "Sword-and-Sorcery in Wargaming." This article seemingly is attempting to get fans of the popular sword and sorcery fiction of the time to buy and play Dungeons and Dragons. The reason included is because it has fictionalized. Well, essentially, to give an example, it fictionalizes a session of play, kind of as like a flash fiction piece. Again, and this relationship between sword and sorcery fiction at the time, which in the early 70s, I mean, this came out in May 1974. I've never actually been able to find out when in 1974 Dungeons and Dragons came out. If anyone could tell me, I've not been able to find it out on the internet at all. I know it came out in 1974. When? I'm not sure at all. But May 1974, maybe it was out by then. Must have been, right? I have done a review actually of a very similar article that doesn't have any fictionalized storytelling in it, though, of a session in particular. It doesn't have like that example of play, and that is Sword and Sorcery is a game too, by Gary Gygax as well. And so hopefully I'll remember to link that here, but that was an interesting, very short article, also found in an early like newsletter or APA type of thing. So this itself is actually from Wargamers Digest, Volume 1, Number 7, again, May 1974. So it mentions chainmail. It starts mentioning that, and maybe as setting the tone, as that is an established product at this point, specifically the fantasy gaming supplement for chainmail. And so he mentions the new Dungeons and Dragons. That's where it leads into. And this is similar to an early article by Gygax, again, that I covered before, Sword and Sorcery is a game too. Among wargamers, though he describes that medieval battles not high in the games that like to be played by wargamers. Napoleonic is much more up there. World War II battles, ancient battles, somewhere down the list at like 5 or 6 is where you get medieval. But fantasy wargaming seems to be getting some popularity. It seems to be gaining some speed in popularity. And so he's pretty much saying, hey, I have some previous stuff here with the fantasy gaming supplement for chainmail, but guess what? There's a new thing we have as well, and that is Dungeons and Dragons. So the story itself is actually recounted of Morton Kanan and his apprentice Bigby. In fact, the former gets turned to stone, and Kuntz was actually Rob Kuntz was actually the DM for this, and it is in the 4th level of a dungeon. It is not mentioned, but it seems likely it could be a version of Kalibruhn, Dungeon of El Raja, which is Kuntz's setting, but Kuntz and Gygax are like kind of co-DMing at this point, and their setting is kind of shared at this point. Again, it's really early Greyhawk, really early. that being said, there are definitely some things that you can see that would later be strictly part of Greyhawk. So we have, again, that mix of setting, but, we have Big B. He returns with 2 fighters and a cleric, mentioning the Patriarch of Greyhawk. Also, Lord Arag and Felnorith are later confirmed members of the Citadel of 8, though that's not mentioned here. So maybe Greyhawk strictly in some sense, or part of the Proto period, really between before Greyhawk and Kalibruhn, strictly split. Kalibruhn is Rob Kuntz's setting that really didn't get... I don't think it's ever been published officially, so it's not really that evolved. I've seen some blog posts about it from Kuntz that maybe I'll try to link down below if you're interested. But I don't know what is specific to Kalibruhn besides El Raja, the dungeon. That's the mega dungeon in a sense. So anyways, that is May 1974. The next thing, and I'm going to link all these below so you can read them yourself. The next one, actually, in order, is Expedition into the Black Reservoir. I don't actually have much to say on this one. It was from El Conquistador, Volume 1, Number 12, from August of 1974, so a few months later. This is pretty strictly actually in Castle Greyhawk, though apparently organically the dungeon level itself was originally part of El Raja, and again, from Kalibruhn. So Iraq is the first character we learn of. One of the characters of Ernie Gygax's, and there's also Londlor, Nulfike, and Ugub or something. And this is the longest of the stories, though it's still not really long. And it is a harrowing encounter about treasure to be had. Essentially, it is again a dungeon delve, just like that other one we just saw. So now then, if we go into the next year, that is the Giant's Bag. Very, very short. Again, by Gary Gygax. In the Elusive Shift, which is a book by John Peterson, I think it is like one of the only scholarly works that I'm aware of about Dungeons and Dragons. He said it's actually released in 1974, but everything I've found points to it actually being released in April of 1975. Again, in a periodical. And I don't think I wrote it down, actually, so sorry about that. I'll try to put that down below. But so Rob Kuntz is DMing. Gary Gygax and his son Ernie are the 2 players. They're both listed as LGTSA members, which is the Lake Geneva Tactical Studies Association. This is essentially a play test for Dungeons and Dragons in the early testing stages of it. It starts with 4 war horses southeast of the city of Greyhawk, led by the sorcerer Nestor with his elven apprentice. They come across an unintelligent but friendly giant who joins them in looking for a lost treasure. It's a short tale that is supposed to be on the humorous side of things. I found it rather trite. I mean, it's a nice look into a D&D adventure, as this is just pretty much a fictionalized game session again, and it's very short. But I didn't find it very enjoyable. I mean, most of these are not actually really that enjoyable. Gygax does not have the best storytelling capabilities, I would say, at all. Maybe the DM, he's much better, and I wouldn't be surprised. But as far as like when I read his writing, I would say the best thing he's ever done from my reading experience with him is Saga of Old City, and that is also heavily borrowing from the Sword and Sorcery stories popular in the years leading up to that, but still enjoyable. So again, this seems maybe to be a mix of the Greyhawk-Kalibruhn stuff, though it obviously is strictly Greyhawk in some sense, because that's, again, it seems like it is. The nice thing to mention here, though, is, again, that it is a wilderness adventure. It is not in the dungeon. And so then last, but not least, because I'm not even sure which one I like the least, maybe Expedition to the Black Reservoir, but well, we have the Magician's Ring, which is also supposed to be on the humor side of things. And that is, Leonard the Magician is not satisfied with his magical power, so he wants magical treasures from Greyhawk Castle. He hires 3 to go with him, a cleric, a fighter, and a mage, and swearing by Crumb and Saint Cuthbert, which Crumb obviously seems to be some like modified version of Crom from the Hyborian Age of Conan, which is probably changed for legal reasons. And then St. Cuthbert, maybe the first mentioning of St. Cuthbert, who is actually a real-life saint, if you're interested. But the Magician actually it has physical combat abilities, but only with the dagger, which lines up with the rules for the time. And the only other really named character actually is Flopspell. And as his name implies, he's supposed to be humorous. And they have like a little bickering thing going on. Probably fun times between the DM and the players. Doesn't transfer over to I think fiction all that well. I mean, it's difficult to say, right? Because fiction can be humorous, right? But it doesn't read a lot like the Sword and Sorcery of the time. Say something like Liber is often humorous, but he is very good at it. Um, and Gygax not so much. Again, maybe on the table it would be better. I mean, because I've had fun D&D sessions where I would not fictionalize those. I would not write it as a short story. But anyways, in part, this one though strictly seems to actually kind of be a guide to referees, and the article is not is I mean, it's not completely concerned with this state of fictionalized play. It mentions dice rolling, particulars like that. In some ways, it's a bit like you might see an example of play in the actual handbook, but not super particular. It doesn't say, oh, and this is what their stats are, blah, blah, blah. It just mentions some dice rolling in particular. That was actually from Wargamers Digest, Volume 2, Number 8, from June 1975. So I think the last of the four. So one thing, again, I think that it's interesting as far as historical context is concerned, is that these are stories that are very early in the development of D&D, in just that first year, pretty much, of D&D, and they show early Greyhawk development. Maybe like up to 10 years before the first Greyhawk novel is going to come out, Saga of Old City, and 4 to 3 years, or 3 to 4 years before another Proto-Greyhawk novel, Quag is going to come out. So, also it also shows kind of like how OD&D was treated. I mean, it doesn't really get into rules, and maybe actually the die rolling thing being like a rather simple suggestions in the Magician's Ring article. Maybe gets to the point that the rules are not as paramount in OD&D, right? Or how things worked. I mean, like the original state of the game was varied widely from what I can understand. I mean, I was not around. I was not alive. Would not be for a couple decades. But that the game was handled very differently in different places. I mean, it was like I've heard stories of like some tables XP was rewarded much more graciously, and you'd have characters at level 250 to 1,000, right? Which is nuts. And so again, it's just interesting that you see early Greyhawk, also some remnants of Kalibruhn, or Kalibruhn, I don't know how to say it, a setting that really doesn't exist in many ways. It never really became an official campaign setting. So you get to see that, which is interesting in a sense of like, as far as in-world perspective. Out-of-world perspective also, though, you see like Dungeon Dragons is really focused with dungeon adventures in big dungeons, and they're focused on treasure finding, and wilderness adventures, which are also focused on treasure finding. And they're highly dangerous. It becomes very evident in the story, which D&D today is still pretty dangerous. I would say. I mean, I don't play the newest versions of D&D, but still. And so dangerous adventures though, again, in dungeons. I don't think there's a dragon in any of them. And then wilderness adventures and treasure. That's what we're concerned with. And so again, very interesting pieces, I think, if you're interested in reading them. I mean, like, if you're interested in history of D&D, I think they're worth a read. They're really, really short. I mean, they're really not that special as far as like literary value is concerned, but as historical pieces, I think there's definitely some value there. So I did want to mention them and do just this short video on all four of them. So anyways, I'll catch you next time with some little later D&D fiction. We'll see if that is any better.